Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only No BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Psychic discoveries behind the Iron Curtain, ETs and abductions, parallel universes, the poetry of Robert Frost, and archaeological evidence of ancient civilizations and gods. These are just some of the topics covered in the 10 best spiritual books list of this week's guest, author, thought leader, spiritual warrior, and temporarily earthbound metaphysical philosopher, Patricia Cori, who's been sharing wisdom about the human condition and the enlightenment of our civilization for 3 decades. The former host of the popular BBS radio show Beyond the Matrix, Patricia Cori has more than a dozen books in print that reveal the truth about the dark agenda playing out in our world and what we as individuals and as a global society can do about it. Her books include The Cosmos of Soul, Atlantis Rising, No More Secrets, No More Lies, The Emissary, and her latest release, Hacking God Code, The Conspiracy to Steal the Human Soul. Patricia Cori, welcome.
Thank you, Sandie. I'm delighted.
Good to have you. So you said that the challenge for you was not to find what 10 books most impacted your spiritual journey, but rather how to limit yourself to 10. So how did you manage that?
Well, I did a recap of my spiritual life and remembering, because I've been on this journey from a very young age, and I am not very young. So I went back to thinking about back at the time of even being a teen, a young woman, how difficult it was to find books that were, except for really ancient philosophies, that were sort of on the cutting edge of the ET question, of the psychic question, etc. And one of the first books that altered my life was absolutely Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. I still have it somewhere tucked away here. I'm sure it's all brown by now, but this book was so eye-opening that today, in the state of the world that we're in now, and by that I don't mean the crisis of the world, but the knowledge levels and the opening to the metaphysical, multidimensional reality, it would seem sort of limited. But at the time, talking about how psychic phenomena was being studied in Russia and the breakthroughs that they were having as researchers and laboratory work, it really opened my mind. And it also helped me understand what I was going through, because I've been psychic from childhood. So it was absolutely wonderful. But it was one of
Do you remember when it came into your life? Because that book was published in 1970.
Yeah, okay. So that would have, because I do remember that it was fresh out when I read it. So 1970, do I have to divulge? 1970, I was 18. So that's about right.
Yeah. I mean, that is one of the standout books in my experience as well. I mean, as you said, it was a real eye-opener. And reading some of the, the different discoveries and the things that were going on there. They were working with, I think, having mothers in bathing pools with dolphins back then, which was pretty much unheard of. And, they also offered a lot of evidence indicating that the Russians were successful in harnessing psychic energy. And I think I read somewhere that it, because it's a long time since I read it, but they also show how Russian scientists advised Pentagon officials on controlling the thoughts of David Koresh during the 1993 Waco, Texas standoff. So, I mean, they were way ahead of the game, I think.
They were. Well, they were divulging a lot of what was underway that we were not privileged to. And I think that, that book was an indicator that, well, it's sort of a precursor to remote viewing, because they were merging science and spirit, but they were predominantly approaching it from a very scientific direction. And I'm quite certain that they were revealing some of those techniques that were then later utilized for remote viewing. Sorry, my dog
wants to join in.
Decided to have an attitude about that. Yeah, it was an amazing book. And like I said, it was one of the only books available on the subject. So that made it all the more special too.
Yeah. Your second book, I mean, I have visions of the cover of that book long before I really dived completely into the spiritual arena, on posters at railway stations and underground stations in England. That book was Communion, and I think anyone who remembers that book cannot forget the image, of that ET face. A true story by Whitley Strieber, which was published in 1987. Tell us about that book and the impact it had on you.
Communion, I was terrified as much as I was bewildered, as much as I was intrigued, because his personal experience was so frightening for him. And yet it catapulted him on his path of lifetime of the whole ET question, his own encounters, etc. And I am also a contactee and haven't ever really delved into that, because I'm much more interested in the multidimensional aspect than I am the ET physical alien question. Although, of course, you can't seem to do one without the other. But nonetheless, it intrigued me. It opened my mind. And it also told me, you're not crazy, and you're not the only one who's asking these questions.
Yeah.
So I just, and he went on to write so many more, but that one, and like you said, it was on the covers of every newsstand, and it was just like, you're not going to get away from this ET face here. And that, the what it meant for the future of humankind, for this to be revealed in that way. It was really a revealing. That's why that book is so important. It opened people to the reality that we're not orphans in the universe here. And the question of, are we being tampered with? Are we being contacted? In a very, very big way. I really salute him for writing that book.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think, it was probably the first one to really go mainstream and be sold, to a mainstream audience. Prior to that, there was a lot of cover-ups going on, and people didn't dare write about it or talk about it because they would be ridiculed. It was very courageous of him.
Yes, that's a very good point, Sandie. It was the first thing that really went mainstream. So that in our ET communities, there's always, an underground of people sharing these kinds of things. But he managed to make it mainstream. Then he made a film, and then he just tore it open, really. So kudos to him. And I think that not only was kudos to him from the point of view of his own journey, but that he encouraged other people who had a story to tell to come forward with it. So in a way, you have to credit Whitley Strieber with disclosure. He may not have had any science facts, but he was instrumental in disclosure.
Yeah. Did his experience mirror yours in any way? Because his was quite a dark experience.
Yes, his was very frightening, and mine was. Yeah. So I've had several encounters, but mostly they've been very beautiful. As a child, I had little beings. I called them the blue people, and they used to come and sit on the leaves of. I used to make I always had a fort, because I was a middle child, but I was the only girl, and I used to spend a lot of time alone because we had a house in the mountains. And the little blue people would come and they'd sit on the fronds of long grass and talk to me. And that was the first encounter. And I've told this story so many times, but my mom told me that when I was 4, I walked in from the fort, and, boy, in those days also, you were not afraid to leave your child in the garden, right? So I came in from the fort and I said, Mom, I need you to know that I'm not from this universe. And she said, sorry, because of course that was the 50s. This language wasn't available then. She said, where are you from, honey? Dismissing it as child talk. I said, I'm from a parallel universe, but I guess you're not ready to know that yet. So I'll talk to you about it later. And I walked back out. And so
leaving her with the bombshell.
Leaving her with a pot of spaghetti sauce that she almost dropped on the floor. And so there have been those kinds of contexts. And I've also had appearances once. Do you want to hear each story?
Well, give us at least one.
I had a center in Rome called Lightworks, and it was a healing center. And I've done some very deep psychic crystal healing work in that place. And one time I had a woman who didn't think she talked about being from another planet. She was an artist. She always drew pictures of aliens. And while I was working on her, I'm in the middle of moving my crystals around, and I've got the music on, and I'm going into this deep place, and I look and I see 6 ET grays standing around the table, which was a little intimidating. And they weren't there for me, they were there for her, but they wanted me to know know that there would be no interfering with her. It was quite a shocker for me. And then I've also, as a channel, I've had the multidimensional contact most of my life, but it really sprang into high gear in 1996 when I went into the crop circle. Julia set, and my whole life changed at that point with these encounters. So I do occasionally have visions of, in that crop circle, I saw ETs walking around, men in black, the whole bit. And I don't know if Whitley's experience was so frightening because there was an intimidation factor there. But in my experiences, it's been mostly wonder, joyous wonder. But I will say this, in the crop circle, when I had that huge, huge experience, there were men in black in there, and they were very intimidating. And I don't know what they are. Are they ETs? Are they multidimensional, interdimensional? I don't know, because I was in such an altered state. I can't even tell you what was real or not. I don't think we can define what real is anymore. But I did have 2 men in black walk by me very threateningly. And I remember feeling like, whoa, I don't know if I want to be involved in this whole storyline. So I think there's an expanse of potential, and that even ET is going, if it's a physical thing, it's going to be subject to the laws of physicality, which means duality. And so we're going to have a range of beings that are light to dark, and however they're attracted to certain people is a question for mass consideration.
Well, before we move on to book 3, tell me, who were these blue beings?
They were emissaries from the Syrian star system, and I work with them. I've worked with them much of my adult life, but as a child, they came to me as little blue people. It sounds strange, but that's what I called them then. And I know that, I believe that they were appearing to me as these little creatures, or these little safe things, little people, so that a child wouldn't be afraid. And I was getting information about multiverses and really intense information as a child. My mother told me that she would just listen to me talk, and that she had no idea where this was coming from. But she said, as long as you don't tell your father about this, go for it, because he won't understand. And so we had regular conversations about other universes and bleeding through from one reality to another. in the 50s. This was not a reality in the 50s.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to that afterwards. Let's move on to book 3, which is We Don't Die, George Anderson's Conversations with the Other Side by Joel Martin and Patricia Romanovsky. That was published in 1988. Tell me about the impact that book had on you.
I have to say that was a fundamental book in my understanding of immortality, which is the most important thing I believe in a spiritual context on our journey, is to understand that we're immortal beings. And without that knowledge, we can't move forward. So all of the conversations about ascension and our journey of spiritual enlightenment, without understanding the basic that we don't die, we shift, we transition, but we don't die. We can't ever quite make the grade spiritually to find the peace that we need to move through this life. So when I read that book, again, like the Russian Soviet Union book, he presents undeniable fact with regard to people who have passed over, usually in a traumatic death scenario, who have come back to speak to whoever they need to speak to resolve or to put to rest the departing. And the science is, I mean, the facts are there. The police are involved. Facts that when the spirits of these people are drawn back by this amazing psychic, he presents facts about how the person died, who did it, whatever, that lead to amazing discoveries. And it's just unquestionable that these are real spirits, the spirits of people who have been murdered or had horrible partings and had to resolve the karma or the wound caused to the loved ones. And it was very, very uplifting, but most important of all, it confirmed in my mind, there's no question that we're immortal beings. No question. And that is a beautiful thing.
Did you know that? Did you believe that? Did you suspect that before? Or was this new to you?
It wasn't new to me, because I would say that my closest path for religion would be Buddhism. I'm not a religious person, I'm a spiritual person, but the Buddhist path really resonates with me. So the idea of reincarnation is something that I've always followed from youth. But what I loved about that book was that it removed any question in my mind about what happens to us when we pass away. And then of course, after that, I've had a near-death experience, which brought me over the rest of the hump. But to know that, to again, when I love when people mix spirit with science.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, it's very fascinating to me. So to address a question like that, the afterlife, from the scientific point of view of a gifted psychic, being able to bring up data, facts, times, dates, locations, to that precision, it was quite a remarkable thing. And I think that he's one of the great psychics that has ever walked this earth. I really recommend people read that book. In fact, as a healer, I have given that book to a lot of people and said, look, read this and then come back to me and tell me if you're still grieving. Because for people that are going through grief, that book is a wonderful healer.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. We need the science, because without the science, we can't ground it, and people aren't going to believe it. And
Yes.
Thankfully, we live in an era now where there's a lot of science emerging. So, yeah.
So true.
So book number 4 is one that comes up time and time again, not surprisingly, and that is Seth Speaks, The Eternal Validity of the Soul by Jane Roberts, published in 1972.
We want to talk about a masterpiece. I think that this is the book. And of course, all of her works, The Nature of Reality is fabulous too. But Seth Speaks is the first Jane Roberts book I ever read. And at the time, like I said, I've been psychic all all through my childhood and my adult life, but I never intended to serve as a medium. I was not, I recoiled at the idea of using my psychic skills that way. But when I read that, I thought, what a miraculous experience and gift to be able to connect with a spirit on the other side that has such wisdom for the human race, such healing, such guidance. Wow. A gift not being used to connect souls with people that have passed over, which is a more common use of mediumship. But it was the first time I'd ever seen or read a psychic using that gift to bring in a teachings, wisdom, immense spiritual guidance from a being of higher consciousness on the other side. And I also loved the fact that there was a lot of humor there. Seth, as an entity, had moments in the middle of all this wonderful wisdom when he would say things like, before you get too excited about passing out of physical reality, let me just tell you what I would give to have a beautiful a glass of Chianti and make love to a beautiful woman again. Oh, what I would give. And I thought, it's really an important message, because so many people are I can't wait to ascend out of here. This idea that there's a better place to be, a higher state to be. And that Seth brings to us, be now, be in the now of your being. It's beautiful where you are. Oh, if I could just sample it again. I thought that was an extraordinarily important message for humankind. So she really grabbed me.
Yeah, you have another of her books as your fifth choice, which is The Nature of Reality, Specific Practical Techniques for Solving Everyday Problems and Enriching the Life You Know, which was published in 1974. Why did you choose that one above all of the others in the series?
I loved the idea that from an entity being channeled from another source, from another dimension, wherever we want to put that, where Seth resides, came pragmatic, practical teachings for human beings to live in the now of their reality, to live it well, to develop their spiritual journey, and to understand the nature of physical reality, and then to understand more about the multidimensional realities that we've discovered much later. It really is, let's say, only about 2 decades where we're really actively speaking about multidimensional reality.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that was instrumental. That piece of work was instrumental in springboarding people into contemplating the multi-universe and all these other layers of consciousness. Wonderful work, beautifully written and powerfully impacting so many lives. I mean, we still have people talk about Seth. The Seth material lives on as truly classic spiritual information.
Yeah, and it's been responsible for sort of waking up so many people. Absolutely. Do you go back and read these books?
Not really, because I don't want to taint my own channel, because I've been channeling now for 25 years. And so what I've gleaned from that material is part of my evolution, but I'm concerned that if I start reading other material, in fact, I don't read any other channeled material, because I don't want to incorporate it without being aware of it and somehow, I don't want to say sabotage, but influence the information that I'm bringing through as a channel. So I don't read channeled material. People have said to me, what do you mean? Why not? There's great information out there, and I do wholeheartedly agree. But I've been channeling now for 25 years, and 13 books later, I still honor that space. But some of the other books, yes, I do. In fact, I've been looking for, when I moved, unfortunately, I left a lot of my books behind. I moved from Rome to Portugal, and I had to let go of a wall of books. And I've been looking for We Don't Die, because I think that's an extraordinary read. So I'm hoping to dig that out and give it another glance.
Okay, well, we're going to take a short break now. We'll be back in a few moments with more from Patricia Cori, so don't go away.
OMTimes TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting OMTimes Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com. Click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. OMTimes Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, OMTimes offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an OMTimes magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on OMTimes TV and broadcasting it across the extensive OMTimes radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. OMTimes. Open yourself to the possibilities.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Patricia Cori, book number 6, The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. Now, you mentioned that you're very interested in Buddhism. Was this book the one that got you interested in Buddhism?
Yeah, well, yes, I think so. I again, as you see a thread here, I'm very interested in the immortality of the soul. So early on, I was drawn to anything that was teaching me about immortality, reincarnation, and the realization that we live on. I love the idea, and I live by it, that there is not a judgmental God to decide my fate, but rather that I create my fate. And the idea of karma being also gathering good karma, because a lot of people think about karma and they immediately start thinking about all of the damage that they've got to repair in the next life. And I remind people, well, you also accumulate good karma. So the attraction to Buddhism is about the empowerment that comes from the idea that we are the masters of our own destiny. And then the Tibetan Book of Dying, the Tibetan book, what is it, of dying?
Living and Dying, yeah.
Is this beautiful pathway to understanding how to live well and what happens when you pass over, and how to make that journey. And talk about a classic book. And it also catapulted me into going to Tibet twice. Who goes to Tibet twice? I went twice in 1 year, because I went once was really for my own edification, but I was thinking maybe I'll bring a group here, because for 20 years or so, I've taken spiritual groups of people on spiritual journeys. And the second trip to Tibet was my first spiritual journey with people. It was an amazing experience. And
Y-
it was
And you said,
still intact.
yes, you said you actually went there before the absolute takeover
Yes.
by China.
It
I
was
mean, what was it like?
1996. And so it was, the damage was already well underway, but it wasn't the Disneyland that's become now. It was still intact. Like now, sigh. The Potala Palace, which I had such a sacred experience in there, it's now a mall. They've turned it into a mall, and I just can't even fathom that. But when I was there, I could the transition was starting. Within the 6 months that I was there, so much more had changed. The people were just desperate. So I'm glad I got there when I did, and I'm glad that I brought some people, sacred seekers of sacred wisdom there.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel an immense connection to the Tibetan path. And although, like I said, I don't religiously follow any path, it is, for me, probably the closest thing to a religion, which it's not, that I would be resonating with.
Mm. Book number 7, quite different. The Poetry of Robert Frost, edited by Edward Connery Lagan. And that was published in 1969.
Yeah, very different, because his love of the earth and his understanding of the interaction between living beings and this palette of beauty of creation really impacted my youth. 69, it was the first time I fell in love. In fact, I have that book I have here, and I pulled it out the other day, and I have the very first rose that I was ever given by my boyfriend, the then boyfriend, in the back of the book, dried in the back of the book. And it just flooded my heart, because it was a time, 69, I was a teen, 16, 17 years old when I read that book. And I was already dabbling with poetry, writing. I mean, writing has been in my blood. And reading that and just seeing the images of this extraordinarily gifted writer, poet, it triggered me in many ways. And it certainly enhanced and triggered my love of nature. So I am in love with the sacred geometry of a leaf, the interaction of animals, the wind in the trees. And, nobody quite does it like Robert Frost for me.
Mm.
And the road not traveled is a blueprint for my life.
Yeah.
I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So, kudos to that. That really, it had an effect on me in another form of spirituality. And that is the being so aware of creation, the beauty of creation. What a piece of work.
Book number 8 is one that I had to smile when I saw it on your list, because it is a book that I wouldn't say it's the best written book in the world, but it is one of the most memorable books that I've ever read. And it really, had me thinking for a long, long time. Unforgettable. Story of one woman's search for the previous life she led in ancient Egypt. The Search for OMTimes, A Story of Eternal Love by Jonathan Cott. Tell me, when you came across this book, how it came into your life, and did it impact you in the same way it impacted me?
It blew me off the map. I was in Egypt on my first trip to Egypt, and since have done, 30, 40 trips. And I don't remember. I do remember. I was waiting to connect to a flight to Luxor, and the flight was delayed as usual. And this book was in the bookstore in the airport. And I looked at it, and I loved the cover. And so I grabbed it then. And I read it voraciously, and it altered my journey, because I went to Abydos, where the story, so we know that the story is about this English woman who at 14 years old started having fantasies, people thought, of being approached by this spirit, the Pharaoh Seti, and eventually made love to. But his ghost was making love to her, and it was just quite a heavy situation for her family because they were very Christian, very strict and proper. And here was their 14-year-old daughter talking about having sexual encounters with this ghost. She went on to, so deep was this love and this passion. And she discovered that she could read glyphs at 16 or 17. She was working in the museum. It's a remarkable story. But there I was, having read the book, having no idea, really. It was my first trip to Egypt. And I went, I'm going there. So I altered my plans and I went to Abydos. And when I went there, today Abydos is a real tourist spot. But at the time, it was really off the beaten path. It wasn't really on the tourist path at all. And I found someone who knew her. And he walked me through where she lived. I was just completely smitten with Seti and her story. This woman who abandoned everything and went to live in Egypt, and she went on to be the guardian of this broken down temple, which fortunately has been rebuilt. But her spirit lingers there. And I also want to say that it's a multidimensional portal, because several people, including me, have had experiences in there where they see something on the wall, and then when they go back, it's gone. And Seti described that. She claimed to have fallen into a room filled with gold objects and ancient urns and whatever, and then she could never find it again. And with me, I was in one of the chambers in the temple, and I was admiring this image on the wall in a sort of trance, because I'm not one to sit and look 8 hours at a piece of art. You know, I enjoy the piece, I'll look at it, but there's more to see, so I'll move on. But I was just entranced in this chamber, and finally pulled myself together and went back. In fact, I went out back to where I was staying for lunch, and I was telling the man, it was a bed and breakfast, I was telling him all about this chamber, and he goes, do you remember where it was? I said, yeah. He said, okay, take me there. So I take him back. It's not there. And I said, this is not possible. I just spent 4 hours in here. I kept looking around. And he said, I had the same experience, but it was 4 chambers down. And when I went back, it wasn't there. I go, hold on a minute. You're freaking me out. So I went up and down thinking I'd made a mistake, thinking whatever, trying to relive that space. And it was so charming, because I had even the guards in the temple racing around saying, oh, no, it's over here, or I saw it there. The bottom line is that it's a multidimensional vortex. And several people have had the same experience that I've had. And Seti in that book, I'm not sure if it's that particular book where she talks about the gold. Do you remember? Falling into the gold chamber? Because she's had other books that I've read.
No, I don't remember that bit. I mean, I remember the overall story.
Just
and some of the other details of the story. That book came to me in a very unusual way. I was on a very, very small island in British Columbia, left England on my adventure to live in America. And they had this tiny little secondhand bookshop. I mean, so small. And the book was there. And I picked it up because, it looked very old. It wasn't, but it looked very old. And I thought, I have to read this. And it's been with me ever since, because it's one of those that you just, wow, as you say, blow you away completely.
I marvel at people who have such unbelievable destinies. It's very extraordinary to read about people's lifetimes and what gets them where they're headed. In her case, this love of this ghost. She ends up working for the Department of Antiquities at that time in Egypt, this totally macho society. Yes. But reading her life story and the magic of it, and the absolute insanity of it, to be 14 years old and to have a visitations from a ghost who makes love with you.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was really, really something intriguing and compelling that never leaves you. You never forget the story of Dorothy Eady when you've read that book.
No,
And my
never.
blessing was to have acquired to have had the ability, because the universe threw that book at me on my way down to Luxor. So this whole history ensued where I spent time there. In fact, I went back there, and my book, Where Pharaohs Dwell, I wrote a lot of it while I was in Abydos. And the man that knew her, Amir, he would sit me in the square where they had this little poor excuse for a snack bar, and he would not let anybody bother me and bring me tea and wait to see what I was writing. It's a whole beautiful connection I have with the place, with Dorothy Eady. I've even been to her gravesite, and it shaped my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, from the moment she first walked into the British Museum to the Egyptian rooms, and as a child, she knew, she recognized something, and she felt that draw, and she could, as you said, she could read the glyphs.
They were flabbergasted when she was reading this, completely reading these texts. I mean, it took them like years to get one sentence or one line, and she was completely reading them, and then went on to work. I find it quite remarkable that she had this extraordinary memory. And again, in line with what I'm interested in was this validation of reincarnation and the immortality of the soul, which is a huge pathway for me. Beautiful material.
Yeah, I'd recommend it to anybody. It is well worth reading. So, book number 9, Parallel Worlds, The Science of Alternative Universes and Our Future in the Cosmos by Michio Kaku, 2004.
Yeah, so as I progressed in my life, I ran across Michio Kaku, who is considered the Einstein of our times. And he's one of the people who developed the string theory of multiple universes. And I even had the honor of interviewing him on my radio show, Beyond the Matrix. And, you know, it's so funny because I remember thinking, how am I going to keep up with this brain? How am I going to talk to this brain of a man? But he was very down to earth. And his gift is the ability to discuss very complex quantum physics with the language that a 3-year-old can understand. So that's his gift as far as I'm concerned. And in this book, we are presented with so much information about string theory, the multiple universe, the multidimensional universe. And I think that this book also has been very instrumental in triggering discussion, not only amongst the scientists, but amongst all of us. Again, science meeting spirit, the idea of strings of reality and many dimensional frameworks for humankind, for life, for consciousness, and for humankind to contemplate. Beautiful book. Again, science meeting spirit, that's a great place for me to hang out, because I work with a lot of people. And in fact, I work with a lot of people whose partners think they're crazy. So I'm able to say, well, there's the science too. Have them read this. And I love that approach, that we want to be able to reach out. We don't want to come off airy-fairy in our spirituality, but grounded and solid. That's where I hope I reside, and I believe that that's how people perceive me, grounded psychic. And so, yes, Kaku, just a great contribution to our evolution from physics to quantum physics.
Yeah. So the last book, Fingerprints of the Gods, The Evidence of Earth's Lost Civilization by Graham Hancock, published in 1995, and currently on Netflix with his first television series.
And it's getting a lot of flack, I hear, because he's challenging the archaeological community.
Yes, but it's getting a lot of attention too, positive attention.
I know Graham personally, and he amazes me. He's when I first met him, he was very scientific about his approach. Then he got involved with ayahuasca lately, and he's gone into this metaphysical approach to a lot of things, which surprised me. But this book triggered my curiosity in ways that got me moving across the planet. I had to know firsthand. And so I've spent many, many years of my life going to sacred sites. I've been to the Mayan lands, and sometimes alone, and then others when I bring spirit groups. I've been twice to Peru. I can't even count how many times to Egypt. That's my home, my spiritual home. Tibet, Southeast Asia, seeking, searching, exploring the clues that we haven't been allowed to understand, the real story instead of the history books. And he was instrumental in bringing forward, at least questioning the narrative and saying, yeah, but there are these interesting clues that don't add up. So thanks to that book, at that point in my journey, when I was just starting to really start doing sacred journeying, I had this curiosity, this thirst to find the clues, to understand, to seek out the real story and separate it from the narrative. And you're starting with Egypt, the ridiculous stories of the pyramid, for example, being a tomb for the pharaoh. You go inside it, you go, no, this is no tomb. Get serious. And so it really triggered my journeying in a big, big way. Love that book. And it's another one. It's a really classic book.
Yes, yeah. Well, that is your 10 best list. So let's talk about you now. You're described as a system buster, a freedom fighter, a warrior for justice, truth, and the liberation of sentient beings on planet Earth. How and when did this all start for you?
I have been challenging the status quo since I was a teenager, bringing up conversations about ET, for example. And again, my age, this was in the 60s, early 60s. I was already talking about life beyond our planet and getting a lot of resistance from people because I was challenging the dogma that we were told to believe. And I didn't care. I did it anyway. So I had to go through that period of being ostracized for what I believed or ridiculed, as a lot of people are going through now. But I was steadfast. And I had this mother, wonderful mother, who encouraged me to speak my truth. So I've been outspoken all my life and curious all my life. And that's a very interesting combination. And I have been journeying and traveling and all the while developing my spiritual path and intent. And I realized early on that I wanted to help liberate people out of the control of dogma, authority, you name it, into thinking, really thinking and experiencing. So early on, I was a system buster. And then once I had this encounter in the crop circles, the books started to pour out of me. So it's 2.5 decades now I'm writing these books, and I've they really challenge, especially the new one, really go against the grain, bringing forward information that wasn't available and challenging the authority. And I'm pleased to say, from the thousands of people who have responded, helping people find their strength, their power to stand up against any dogma and find their truth and to anchor that truth. And this latest book, I knew it was going to be a tough one because you're not supposed to talk about the things I talk about in that book. So I had a moment where I was, like, okay, do I really want to put myself in such a situation where I'm even endangering myself by bringing the truth forward? And I had about a 2-week time period where I was just deliberating if I wanted to do that. And then the voice was, yep, sorry, I've got a hair in my eye. The voice was, yep, do it anyway. Get it out there. That's who you are. That's what you stand for. Don't be in fear. Otherwise, you can't talk about it. Fearlessness. If that's your message, then you've got to demonstrate it. So that's when I self-published this book. This is the first self-published book I've done. And
was it the first books that actually made it possible for you to make this your career, or were you always earning your living doing something in the metaphysical arena?
I came from the hotel industry. I was a PR person in the hotel business. And then in Rome, I worked for a 5-star hotel for about a year. And then I opened my own PR firm. And in the meantime, I did this hunger to serve in the spiritual work took over. So I was working in PR, my own business. And then I also opened Lightworks, which was the first New Age center in Rome. So I was working 22 hours a day, and I was able to move into strictly working for Spirit, to abandon the PR. It was hard work, but you don't get rich writing books, that's for sure, unless you've got $1 million bestsellers. But because I was taking people on journeys and doing speaking engagements or whatever, I was able to, survive on the work that I was doing for spiritual purposes and intent. So it's like, I think 2.5 decades later, I'm still writing. I'm not taking people on journeys anymore because of the lockdown problems and all that's ensued in the travel industry. And I'm also a screenwriter, and I have 2 films in development. One of them is very, and those screenplays are also very spiritually oriented. So it's my mission, and my mission is empowerment and love and enlightenment.
So let's talk about this new book that contains information you're not supposed to be talking about. Tell us about it. Hacking the God Code, the conspiracy to steal the human soul. What is going on? Why is it going on? And where are you getting your information?
What is going on is that there is a cabal of transhumanists who are absolutely dead set on taking the human race from a biological species to a semi-robotic species. And again, this is not just spirit, this is science. We have the information. These people are coming out and telling us. This man, Harari, who is a representative for the World Economic Forum, has stated in more than one interview that the human being is obsolete, that we're hackable animals, that they have the knowledge and ability to alter us and turn us into a new species, which he feels would be better. And that's humans 2.0. And he's actually said, this business of God and the idea of the immortality of the soul, he said, that's over. That was so chilling to me. Over? I so don't think so. But what we are witnessing now is that this AI/robotic program is in runaway, free. They've got all the funding they need. It's about genetics. It's about robots. It's about implanting humans to turn them into some sort of cyborg type of sci-fi reality. But the thing is, it's not sci-fi. They're openly telling us they're doing it. And the vehicle for that is the implantation of devices within the human body and the alteration of human DNA. So that enrages me. And so I decided that I needed to write about that. And first of all, to expose it, to make it clear that it's not sci-fi and it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a reality, and to help people understand what to do about that, how to maintain their sovereignty of body, spirit, and mind. So it's the rebel in me that said, okay, I'm going to take this on too and be fearless about it.
Well, I think, since time began, there have always been people who think they know who and what we should be and have tried to make their ideas a reality. But, it has to be a fact that you cannot, no matter what you can take life, but you cannot take somebody's soul unless they give you permission.
That is the point of the book. Because when you say yes, whether or not it's signing a contract in blood, or whether or not it's allowing yourself to be penetrated with a needle, when you say yes to the needle, you're saying, yes, I give myself. Go ahead, do what you want with me. So that's why it's so controversial, because this is a subject that we're not supposed to talk about.
No, it is a very, very controversial subject. And yes, there are many, many different opinions. And it is a subject that people feel passionate about on all sides.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
So how is the book doing?
Very well.
Very well.
I was expecting quite a backlash because of that very point that people are passionate on both sides. Excuse me. Shush. But surprisingly,
your dog has something to say.
She's just decided that she's going to be involved here. But I'm surprised that not only has there not been any negative backlash, but it's just been rave. And so many people have said it's my very best work. That surprises me because of the controversial nature of the book. But it just really appeals, again, to people to have them understand what's underway and to embody the empowered soul that no, they're not going to let anyone come in and alter them. Because the idea in the book is that what if they're able to splice out the DNA, the God code within the DNA? What about that? Because they're doing this kind of work in laboratories. So I'm exposing the question, is there a God code? And if so, a signature, divine creator's light signature in this complex language that is our DNA. And how do we make sure that nobody interferes with that? Because that's what they want to do. They want to eliminate, he said it, this thing about the soul. It's so yesterday. They're coming after the soul of humanity. And if you believe, and I'll just put this out there as a subject for debate. If you do believe that there is a satanic force that has that intention to take away the light of the human race, then you better have an idea of how they would operate to come after that soul essence. I believe, as you, that you can't steal someone's soul. But the question here is, if there is a satanic force at work, it's not enough just to kill us. They want the soul. And so my book is about not letting that happen, making sure that does not happen.
So did you self-publish this because it was controversial, or because your publishers were afraid to publish it?
My publisher, how bizarre, something just fell over. Oh boy. My publisher, I'm sorry, the dogs are going to be activated now. It's okay, girls. It's okay. It's okay. Exhibited concern about the material. And so we agreed, because if they felt that way, I honored it. We agreed that it wasn't for them after doing all the work. It was contracted. All the work, they said, we just don't feel comfortable with this material. It's you. And I said, okay. And I said, well, and that's when I took the few weeks thinking, do I really want to put myself in a position where I'm endangering myself putting out a book? And the answer was an unequivocal yes. Do it anyway. So this was my first stab at self-publishing, and I have to say I really like it. Because I've been blessed with having been published very effortlessly. with all my other books. They're just the agreements just came to me. It really
Yeah.
did hardly had to look. But this one is my first and not my last self-published book, because the freedom is just wonderful.
Yes. Yeah. And the speed and many other reasons.
Speed. I
Yeah.
can see you're a self-published author.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. We're almost out of time. One last question. What are you reading now?
What am I reading now? Well, I've had the poetry of Robert Frost back out, and I just put Watership Down on my coffee table.
Really?
Oldies but goodies. So I'm not
Yeah.
reading any intense spiritual material at the moment, but I want to be at night. I want to read light, loving, soft, sweet information so that I can sleep better. And I remembered how much I enjoyed Watership Down, so I've got that out, and that's my next book. Yeah,
Good.
I'm not reading any. I've got such a library of books to read that are more powerful information about quantum physics, which is a field I love. But right now, my brain needs a rest.
I have a story about Watership Down, and it's a little bit of a twisted humour story, because it came out at a time when my children were a lot younger, and it's a very sweet story,
It is.
and then it became a movie, and Art Garfunkel sang the song Bright Eyes, and my local butcher's shop in England had rabbits hanging in the window. And he had a sign that's, and I'd just been reading this book to my children. And he had a sign that said, "You've read the book, you've seen the movie, now eat the cast." And I had to unravel my daughter from that one.
A sicko.
Mm,
That's terrible.
I know. He thought it was funny.
It's not.
But he was a butcher, so he would.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
My. Some people are so insensitive. We have to remember some people are very, very numb.
Yes. Yeah.
Yikes.
And, always will be. Always will be. Patricia Cori, thank you so much for adding your 10 best list to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations. And I look forward to interviewing you in a few weeks' time on what is going on about your new book, Hacking the God Code. So thank you.
I'm looking forward to it too. Thank you, Sandie.
You're welcome. So if you want more information about Patricia Cori, her books, private sessions, clairvoyant readings and courses, visit patriciacori.com. That's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me.